She got kicked out of sniper school for shaky hands. A young sergeant sneered as he watched the small, brown-haired girl holding a rifle on the hill. Nobody in the unit trusted her, but when the squad was pinned down by enemy fire, with no backup coming, a single sharp crack echoed from the forest edge. One bullet, straight through the enemy sniper's scope. The young soldier lowered his head and whispered, "She's the only one who ever passed Carter's final test, even though no one recorded it." Erin Mallory stood 5 feet 4 inches in her combat boots, 27 years old with chocolate brown hair, always pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was always pressed, her gear always clean, her posture always perfect. She served as rear support personnel with the 143rd Brigade, handling communications and logistics while real soldiers did real fighting. At least that's what everyone believed. 3 years ago, she'd been the star student at Carter Sniper Training Academy, top of her class in marksmanship, tactical positioning, and psychological evaluation. Her instructors called her a natural. Her classmates called her lucky. Then came the final evaluation. During a simulated combat scenario, an unexpected explosive blast threw her backward into a concrete barrier. The impact dislocated her shoulder and sent her rifle clattering across the floor. When the smoke cleared, instructors found her on the ground, weapons several feet away. The official report was swift and final. Candidate exhibits hand tremors under stress. Medical disqualification recommended. What the report didn't mention was that she'd held onto that rifle for nearly 4 seconds after the blast, fighting through pain and disorientation. What it didn't record was her perfect score on every single test leading up to that moment. 5 consecutive shots at 1,000 meters. All center mass, all lethal. But paperwork doesn't care about context. The rumor mill at Carter Academy was merciless. Mallory's got shaky hands, can't handle pressure, doesn't have the mental strength for sniper work. Within a week, she was reassigned to logistics support. No appeals process, no second chances. Just a stamp on her file that followed her everywhere. Unsuitable for combat operations. Back at base camp with the 143rd, the mockery was constant and creative. "Hey, Erin, try not to drop the coffee pot like you dropped your rifle. Maybe we should get her some of those grippy gloves they make for old people. I heard she cried when they kicked her out. Probably would have cried during her first real firefight, too." Sergeant Marcus Harlan, squad leader of Bravo 2, made his position crystal clear during her first briefing. Mallory handles communications only. She doesn't touch a weapon during operations. She doesn't make tactical decisions. She stays in the rear and keeps her mouth shut. But every night after the others were asleep, Erin would slip away to practice. Breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control. She'd run through every lesson Carter had taught, every principle she'd mastered, every skill they'd tried to tell her she didn't possess. And she kept the bullet Carter had given her on her last day. Only fire this when you're absolutely certain it will save a life. The mission briefing was straightforward. Delta Team had been conducting reconnaissance near the Cadron Forest when they'd walked into an ambush. Intelligence suggested at least one enemy sniper had them pinned down behind a rocky outcropping. No movement for 6 hours. No radio contact for 3. Bravo 2's job was simple. Locate Delta Team, neutralize threats, extract personnel. Sergeant Harlan assigned positions as they approached the target area. "Johnson, you take point. Martinez, cover R6. Williams, watch the eastern approach." He looked at Erin last. "Mallory, you stay behind that fallen log and monitor communications. If I need you to relay a message, I'll tell you exactly what to say." The forest was eerily quiet as they moved into position. Too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. Then the shooting started. The first shot came from somewhere high and to the west. Johnson dropped immediately, clutching his shoulder. Before anyone could react, a second shot rang out and Martinez went down hard. "Shoot her on the high ground," Harlan screamed. "Everyone find cover and stay low." For 12 agonizing minutes, they lay pinned down while an invisible enemy picked them apart. Every time someone tried to move, another shot would crack across the valley. Every attempt to radio for backup was met with static and interference. Erin pressed herself against the fallen log, her mind automatically calculating angles and distances. Years of training kicked in, despite her official status as communications only. She studied the terrain, tracked the sound of gunshots, analyzed the timing between shots. The enemy sniper was positioned approximately 800 meters away, elevated roughly 60 feet above their position, concealed behind a cluster of pine trees on the western ridge. Difficult shot, but manageable with the right angle and proper equipment. She whispered to Harlan, "Sergeant, I think I can get a clean shot if I can reach my rifle." Harlan's response was immediate and harsh. "Absolutely not. This isn't some training exercise where you get to play sniper. This is real combat, and I'm not going to watch you get yourself killed trying to relive your academy fantasies." "But sir, I know exactly where he is. The angle is none of your concern, Mallory. Your job is communications. Period." Another shot echoed across the valley. This time it was Harlan who cried out, blood spreading across his leg. Erin watched her squad leader writhe in pain behind inadequate cover. She listened to the panic in her teammates' voices as they realized their situation was deteriorating rapidly. No backup coming. Limited ammunition. Growing casualty count. She made her decision. While the others focused on their wounded leader, Erin quietly retrieved the rifle from her pack. The same weapon she'd carried on every mission. The one Harlan had explicitly ordered her never to touch. Her fingers traced the familiar contours of the stock, the scope, the trigger guard. Moving with practiced stealth, she began working her way around the squad's position, staying low, using natural cover, following the creek bed to mask her movement. Every step was deliberate and silent. As she crawled through the underbrush, Carter's voice echoed in her memory. The difference between a good shooter and a great shooter isn't accuracy under perfect conditions. It's the ability to make impossible shots when everything is going wrong. Through her earpiece, she could hear her squad's situation getting worse. "We've got 3 men down and we're almost out of ammo. Where the hell is that backup? If we stay here much longer, we're all dead." Erin reached her firing position and settled in for what might be the most important shot of her life. Erin lay motionless in the tall grass for exactly 9 minutes and 37 seconds. Her breathing was controlled and rhythmic. Her heartbeat was steady. Her hands were absolutely still. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same steady hands they'd declared too shaky for sniper work were now the only thing standing between her squad and total annihilation. Through her scope, the target area was partially obscured by shadows and overlapping tree branches. The enemy sniper had chosen his position well. Excellent field of fire, natural concealment, multiple escape routes, professional work. But Erin had spent 3 years analyzing her failure at Carter Academy. 3 years replaying every lesson, every technique, every principle she'd been taught. She knew something about patience that her younger self hadn't understood. The scope wasn't powerful enough to give her a clear visual on the target in these lighting conditions. She needed to wait for the enemy to make a mistake, to reveal himself through movement or reflected light. Her earpiece crackled with increasingly desperate updates. "Harlan's losing too much blood. We need immediate medical evacuation. I count at least 3 more hostiles moving up from the south." The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but Erin forced herself to remain calm. Carter had taught her that panic was a sniper's greatest enemy. "When everything around you is chaos," he'd said, "you become the calm center. You become the one fixed point in a spinning world." Then she saw it, a brief flash of sunlight reflecting off metal as the enemy sniper adjusted his position. Just for a fraction of a second, but enough. Erin closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to her old instructor. "Carter, I won't waste this shot." She squeezed the trigger with perfect, textbook form. The bullet traveled 847 meters in 1.2 seconds. It passed through 3 layers of pine branches, a cluster of leaves, and a small gap between 2 tree trunks before striking its target with surgical precision. The enemy sniper was killed instantly. Silence fell over the battlefield like a heavy blanket. Then chaos erupted over the radio. "Shooter's down!" "Repeat. The shooter is down." "Who made that shot? Where did that come from? How is that even possible?" Erin stood up from her concealed position and began walking back toward her squad, rifle held across her chest. Every eye was on her as she approached. The young private who had mocked her relentlessly for months stared at her with something approaching awe. He turned to his buddy and said quietly, She's the only person who ever actually passed Carter's final test, but they never put it in her official record. What he said was absolutely true. 3 years ago, Sergeant Major Carter had personally reviewed Erin's performance during her final evaluation. Despite the incident with the dropped rifle, her overall score was the highest he'd seen in 2 decades of instruction. Her tactical knowledge was flawless. Her marksmanship was exceptional. Her psychological profile showed remarkable stability under pressure. Carter had fought the medical disqualification. He'd submitted 3 separate appeals, each with detailed documentation of Erin's actual capabilities. He'd requested a formal review of the incident, complete with video analysis showing exactly what had happened during that explosive blast. Every appeal was denied. The bureaucracy had made its decision. On Erin's last day at the academy, Carter pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "I've been training snipers for 23 years. I've seen natural talent, and I've seen hard work, and I've seen dedication, but I've never seen all 3 combined the way they are in you." He pressed a single bullet into her palm. "This is from my first confirmed kill in combat. I've been saving it for someone special, someone who understands that our job isn't about trophies or records or proving how tough we are. Our job is about saving lives when everything else has failed." Now, 3 years later, that bullet had found its purpose. Within hours, drone footage of Erin's shot was circulating through military networks. The video showed everything: the impossible angle, the perfect accuracy, the steady hands that supposedly weren't steady enough for sniper work. Comments poured in from snipers around the world. "This is what real marksmanship looks like. Whoever failed her should be court-martialed. I've been shooting for 15 years and I couldn't make that shot." But Erin didn't care about vindication. She only cared that her friends were going home alive. 7 days after the Cadron Forest incident, Erin received orders to report to base headquarters immediately. She expected disciplinary action for disobeying Harlan's direct orders about weapons handling. Instead, she found Sergeant Major Carter waiting for her in the lobby. He was older now, grayer, wearing civilian clothes instead of his familiar instructor's uniform. But his handshake was still firm, and his eyes still held that sharp intelligence that had made him legendary among sniper trainees. "I told you that bullet was special," he said with a slight smile. "I just didn't know it would take 3 years to prove it." That afternoon, during the memorial service for soldiers killed in action, the base commanding officer made an unexpected announcement. "Among us today is someone who was once told she wasn't good enough for combat operations. Someone who was dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. That person is the reason 9 of our people came home alive from what should have been a suicide mission." He gestured toward Erin, who stood at attention in the back row. Specialist Erin Mallory represents the best of what we strive for in the military. Not because she made an impossible shot under impossible conditions, but because she never stopped believing in herself when everyone else had given up on her. Erin didn't give a speech. She simply stood quietly, one hand resting over the empty pocket where Carter's bullet had once been. 2 weeks later, she received new orders. Report to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility as an assistant instructor for crisis response techniques. Her first day on the job, she found a nameplate waiting on her desk. Specialist Erin Mallory, never shot for records, only shot to save lives. The academy's culture began shifting almost immediately. New recruits would ask about the nameplate, and instructors would tell them Erin's complete story. Not just the successful shot, but the 3 years of doubt and determination that led to that moment. Training protocols were updated to emphasize real-world decision-making over test scores. Psychological evaluations were revised to account for different types of stress responses. The academy even implemented a new policy requiring multiple reviewers for any medical disqualification. Erin's story became required reading for all incoming students. They learned about the difference between performance under controlled conditions and performance when lives depend on the outcome. Most importantly, they learned that sometimes the most valuable people are the ones who've been told they're not valuable at all. Young snipers would seek Erin out for advice, expecting technical tips about long-range shooting or equipment maintenance. Instead, she would tell them, "The most important shot you'll ever take won't be on a range. It will be when everyone is counting on you and you're not sure you can make it. That's when you discover who you really are." Some people don't need certificates or official recognition to prove their worth. Their value reveals itself when everything else has failed and lives hang in the balance. Erin Mallory was labeled as someone lacking courage, stability, and skill. But when trained soldiers lost their nerve under pressure, she remained calm and precise. When experienced leaders made panic decisions, she made the right choice. True honor doesn't announce itself with medals or promotions. It lives quietly in moments when one person's steady hand can mean the difference between tragedy and triumph. The military bureaucracy said Erin's hands were too shaky for sniper work, but when her squad needed a miracle, those same hands delivered perfection on the first try. She failed sniper school according to her official record, but she passed the only examination that truly mattered, the one where failure meant watching her friends die. And she didn't just pass. She set a new standard for what's possible when someone refuses to accept other people's limitations. Sometimes the best shots are taken by people who were never supposed to be shooters at all.